Hello guys, welcome to another Flipped Classroom, and today our group will talk about medieval kingdoms. First we are going to talk about the cultural, then the economical, then the social, and finally about the political aspects of those kingdoms. Well, talking about the cultural aspects, there were a lot of them. First, we need to know that the medieval kingdoms were not composed by an homogeneous population. They were a mix of German, barbarians, and Roman. That's because after Rome went down, a lot of barbarians and Germans got possession of Roman territories and founded a lot of kingdoms, initiating the medieval era. Okay, talking about the culture, just a little bit of the population could read and write, since that just the rich people studied and most of the classes were in churches. The official language was the Latin, but plebeians used to speak an informal type of the language since they didn't have education. The architecture is very known by the castles and churches, and the music received a lot of influence by the church, and a lot of songs were religious, like the Gregorian sacred song sang by the Pope. The main instruments were the flute, the stock, the drums, and the harp. The literature was marked by the use of the Latin, and most of the books had religious theme. Besides that, there were lyric texts, and the troubadour poetry first appeared. The culinary was rich in potatoes, breads, and fruits, and the meat was a very rare type of food. They also used a lot of spice like the nutmeg. The principal type of science was the alchemy that tried to transform things in gold. The medicine were very studied too and suffered influence by the Greeks. Well, that's all that we have to talk about the culture, and now Gustavo will talk about the economy of the medieval kingdoms.
Okay, so I'm going to talk about the economical aspects of the medieval kingdoms. So, after the fall of Rome, people used less money than they used before, and this was because they started to live on what they could produce or what they could receive because they were landlords or landladies. Basically, a landlord and a landlady are the people who receive like taxes from the population and they receive food, materials, and production in general. In the Byzantine Empire, by about 650 AD, Romans had learned how to produce silk. Vikings, living in Scandinavia, in northern Europe, carried on a lot of early trades because they used their boats. They could carry European materials through Russia, southeast to the Samanids, where they could trade Chinese silk and Indian pepper for medicines. Mediterranean trade at first was greatly disrupted by Vandal pirates and Vikings, and then by the Byzantine reconquest. But by about 800 AD, the trade began to become more secure, and then people began to trade a lot more. These trades became more secure because between 800 and about 1000, Mediterranean port cities like Genoa, Pisa, and Toulouse were doing very well. These cities became increasingly powerful and imported paper, steel, silk, Chinese porcelain, Persian carpets, cotton, sugar, glass, and spices like cinnamon and pepper from Silk Road traders. In return, they sold European wool cloth, perfume, wine, furs, silver, and gold to the Islamic Empire and further east. During the High Middle Ages, the Crusades helped to increase the amount of trade in the Mediterranean. Europeans who had been to the eastern Mediterranean on crusade met Arab traders there and brought Asian products back to Europe to sell. At the same time, the Crusades led to the King of France and England to impose a new tax in money, called the Saladin tax, that also helped to re-establish the money-based economy. Fairs and markets became more and more important. By 1350, the plague wiped out about one of every three people in Europe, and weakened many of the old relationships between lords and peasants. A lot of peasants whose families had died wanted to move to the cities, so the cities got more powerful than they had been before. And instead of country fairs and markets, people began to do their shopping at regular stores in the cities. At the same time, the lords and kings began charging more and more taxes in money rather than in things, so people had to sell their crops in order to get money to pay their taxes. Soon, people, especially in Italy, were setting up banks and changing money from one currency to another, and Europeans kept right on making more of their own paper and sugar. In the 1300s, Europeans began to sell paper and sugar to Egypt and West Asia. In the 1400s, Italian farmers began to grow their own cotton, and they were working on ways to make their own steel. By the end of the Middle Ages, rather than looking for ways to buy luxuries, Europeans were beginning to look for markets where they could sell their own products.
Now, talking about the social aspects of the medieval kingdoms, it was composed by three main groups: the Germanics, the Slavs, and the Tartar Mongols. The Germanic habited the Western Europe and was in Indo-European origin. It was divided into subgroups. They are Ostrogoths, Vandals, Bretons, Saxons, and others. The political organization of the Germans are quite simple. In peacetime, they are governed by some warriors made by the most experienced men. These men did not have legislative powers, but it also decided the issues of the war and peace, and if the tribe should move to another location or stay in their place. Talking about the groups which take part of the Germanic, the kingdom of the Visigoths, located in the Iberian Peninsula, was the oldest and the biggest. They strategically occupied the connection between the Mediterranean Sea and the Atlantic Ocean, which allowed them to achieve commercial supremacy between continental and insular Europe. The kingdom of the Ostrogoths were located in the Italic Peninsula and preserved the artistic and cultural patrimony of Rome, and they restored several monuments to keep the Roman memory alive. In time of war, the tribe was governed by an institution called comitatus. It was a meeting of warriors around the military leader, which all owed total obedience. This leader was elected and took the title of Herrgott. The Germanics lived from a rudimentary agriculture, from hunting and fishing, not knowing advanced agricultural techniques. The Slavs are composed by people of a lot of parts of the world. Some of them are of Western Europe, some of Asia, including Russia, the Czechs, the Poles, the Serbs, and many others. The Tartar Mongols were composed only by tribes of Asian origin, like Huns, Turks, Bulgarians, and others.
Politically, this period is characterized by the formation of feudal monarchs and the division of lands, sharing the authority of government with nobles allied to the government. This practice of administration culminated in the decentralization of political forces. In this period, the relation of vassalage and suzerainty prevailed, established by the exchange of favors based on trust and fidelity, beginning a political alliance. The ultimate suzerain in medieval kingdom was a monarch, who ceded lands of his kingdom to the other nobles, who would be understood as vassals, submitted to their relative authority in practical terms. The transformation of noble into vassal took place through a ceremony called homage. In this way, economic and political powers are concentrated in the hands of the feudal lords, owners of lands denominated fiefdoms. The feudal system is the way of the economic, political, and social organization of Europe, which ran from the 9th to the 16th centuries. With the barbarian invasions and disintegration of the Roman Empire, Europe began a profound reconstruction, marked by the centralization of power and the employment of servile labor. The social structure is stateless, with little social mobility and based on relations of servile dependence and vassalage. The fiefdoms are characterized by the self-sufficiency and almost total absence of commercial and monetary exchange. The Catholic Church holds great political and economic power, exerting a strong control over the scientific and cultural productions of the time.
Now the world don't move to the beat of just one drum. What might be right for you may not be me write a song.